The letter trembled in my hands as I stood in the lawyer's office, 18 years old and completely alone, staring at words that would change everything. Andrew Reed, a man I had never met, had left me his entire ranch. 60 acres of Montana land, a house, livestock, and equipment worth more than I had ever dreamed of possessing. The catch was that I had exactly 30 days to claim it, and there were people who wanted to make sure I never did. I am Nancy Watson, and this is the story of how I went from being nobody's daughter to someone's legacy, from a girl who had never been chosen to inheriting a life I never knew existed. But before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. Your support means everything as I share this journey with you. Let me take you back to the beginning, to that gray November morning when everything started. I was sitting in the common room of Riverside Children's Home, the same place I had called home for as long as I could remember. 18 years in the system, and not once had anyone walked through those doors looking for me. Other kids got visits, phone calls, weekend trips with potential families. I got good grades and learned to be invisible. The social worker, Sarah Miller, found me there with my acceptance letter to community college, trying to figure out how I would pay for even the cheapest education when I age out in 3 weeks. She had this strange expression on her face, like she was holding something fragile that might break if she moved too quickly. "Nancy," she said, sitting down beside me on the worn couch where I had spent countless hours reading library books and dreaming of somewhere else. "There is someone here to see you, a lawyer." I remember thinking it was probably about some paperwork for aging out, maybe something about the small fund the state provided for kids like me. I had never seen a lawyer before, and Anthony Jones looked exactly like what I imagined lawyers should look like. Expensive suit, serious expression, briefcase that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. He explained that he had been searching for me for months. Andrew Reed, a rancher from a small town called Millbrook in Montana, had died 6 months earlier. In his will, he had left everything to Nancy Watson, born on March 15th, 18 years ago at Riverside General Hospital. That was me, down to the exact date and location. But here is what made my heart stop. Andrew Reed was my grandfather, my mother's father, a man who had been looking for me since the day I was born. The day my teenage mother had died in childbirth, and I had been surrendered to the state because no one knew I had family. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a letter that would haunt me for weeks. Andrew had written it just before he died, somehow knowing he would never meet me, but hoping I would find my way to him eventually. "Dear Nancy," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have failed in the one thing that mattered most to me, finding you while I was still alive to hold you and tell you how sorry I am. Your mother Emma was my daughter, and losing her was the greatest pain of my life. But losing you, not even knowing you existed until it was too late, that is the regret I carry to my grave." He explained how my mother had run away at 16 after a fight about her boyfriend, my father, who had died in a car accident before I was born. She had been too proud and too hurt to come home, and he had been too stubborn to keep looking when his first attempts failed. By the time he learned about me, I had already been in the system for years, and the records were sealed. "I spent every dollar I had and called in every favor trying to find you," he wrote. "This ranch, everything I built, it was always meant to be yours. You are my blood, my legacy, the daughter of my daughter, and you deserve to know where you come from." The lawyer, Anthony Jones, explained the terms. "I had 30 days to travel to Millbrook and claim the inheritance in person. If I failed to do so, the property would be sold and the money donated to charity." It seemed straightforward enough until he mentioned the complications. Andrew Reed's brother, Gary Walker, had been contesting the will since the day it was read. Gary claimed that I was an imposter, that his brother had been mentally unstable when he wrote the will, and that the property should pass to him as the nearest living relative. He had been working the ranch for the past 6 months, claiming squatters' rights, and had no intention of giving it up to some kid from an orphanage. The bus ride to Montana took 2 days, and I spent every mile wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I had exactly $400 to my name, a duffel bag with everything I owned, and a letter from a dead grandfather who promised me a home I had never seen. Sarah Miller had helped me get emergency documents and a bus ticket, but after that, I was on my own. Millbrook turned out to be the kind of town you see in movies about small-town America. One main street, a diner, a feed store, and a post office that doubled as the town meeting hall. Population 812, according to the welcome sign, and I was pretty sure I was the only person under 30 who was not related to someone else. I found the lawyer's office above the hardware store. Christopher Castillo was Anthony Jones's local partner, and he had been handling the estate while the will was being contested. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of easy smile that made you trust him immediately. The good news was that Gary Walker's challenge was falling apart. The bad news was that he was not giving up quietly. Christopher explained that Gary had been telling everyone in town that I was some kind of con artist, that Andrew had been tricked by scammers into believing he had a granddaughter. Some people believed him, especially the older folks who had known the family for decades. But here is what I learned about small towns. They might be suspicious of strangers, but they also have a deep sense of fairness. And Andrew Reed had been respected in Millbrook. He had employed half the town at one time or another, had helped families through tough times, and had never broken his word to anyone. If Andrew said I was his granddaughter, then most people were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. Christopher drove me out to the ranch that first afternoon, and I understood immediately why Andrew had fought so hard to find me. The property sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, with the Rockies visible in the distance. The house was a two-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, painted white with blue shutters, surrounded by oak trees that must have been planted decades ago. But it was the barn that made me cry. Someone, probably Andrew, had painted my name above the door in careful letters. Nancy's place, it said, like he had been preparing for my arrival long before he knew if I would ever come. Gary Walker was waiting for us in the driveway, and the resemblance to the photos of Andrew was unmistakable. Same broad shoulders, same steel gray hair, same stubborn set to his jaw. But where Andrew's eyes had been kind in the pictures I had seen, Gary's were hard and calculating. "You must be the famous Nancy," he said, looking me up and down like I was livestock. He was considering purchasing. "Funny, you do not look much like Emma. Of course, I only met her once or twice before she ran off and broke her father's heart." Christopher stepped between us before I could respond. "Gary, we have been through this. The DNA test confirmed Nancy's identity, and the will is clear. You need to remove your belongings and turn over the keys." Gary laughed, but there was no humor in it. DNA tests can be faked, and wills can be forged. Andrew was sick at the end, everyone knows that. Grief and medication can make a man believe anything. You really think some kid from an orphanage is going to be able to run this place? She will be gone within a month, and then in what had happens to everything Andrew Barrow's parent. He was not wrong about my inexperience. I had never been on a farm, never ridden a horse, never even owned a pet. But standing there in the shadow of the barn with my name painted on it, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, Christopher put me up in the town's only bed and breakfast, run by an elderly woman named Heather Gomez, who had known Andrew since they were children. She made me dinner and told me stories about my grandfather that the lawyers had never mentioned, how he had started with nothing and built the ranch through decades of hard work, how he had never married after my grandmother died young, had poured all his love into raising Emma alone, how he had blamed himself when she ran away, and how finding out about me had given him purpose in his final years. "Andrew was a good man," Heather said as we sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "But he was proud, maybe too proud for his own good. When Emma left, he was hurt bad. Took him years to admit he might have been wrong about some things. By then, it was too late to fix it with her. But maybe it is not too late to fix it with you." The next morning, I walked back to the ranch alone. Gary's truck was gone, but I could see evidence of his occupancy everywhere. Beer cans in the flower beds my grandfather had planted, muddy boots on the front porch, and a general air of neglect that felt like disrespect. I used the key Christopher had given me and stepped inside my inheritance for the first time. The house was beautiful in a way that spoke of care and attention to detail. Hardwood floors that gleamed even under a layer of dust, built-in bookshelves filled with volumes on farming and ranching, and photographs covering every surface. Most of the photos were of Emma, my mother, at various ages. As a baby in Andrew's arms, as a toddler on a pony, as a teenager in a graduation cap and gown. But there were others too, pictures of the ranch through the years, of neighbors and friends, of cattle and horses and harvests. It was a life documented in images, and I was seeing it for the first time. In Andrew's bedroom, I found more letters. Not just the one he had left for me, but dozens of others that he had written over the years and never sent. Letters to Emma, apologizing for being too rigid, too demanding, too afraid of losing her to let her make her own mistakes. Letters to me, written to a granddaughter he hoped existed somewhere, telling me about the ranch and the family history I had never known. The legal battle with Gary Walker came to a head 3 weeks after I arrived in Millbrook. He had hired a lawyer from Billings, a sharp-dressed woman named Judith Alvarez, who specialized in estate disputes. She argued that Andrew's will was the product of diminished capacity, that grief and medication had made him vulnerable to manipulation by people claiming to be his lost family. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, an imposing brick building that had seen a century of disputes over land and legacy. Half the town showed up, some supporting Gary because they had known him all his life, others supporting me because they trusted Andrew's judgment. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my only dress, bought secondhand from a thrift store in Great Falls, feeling like I was on trial for the crime of existing. Judith Alvarez was good at her job. She painted a picture of a lonely old man, desperate for family, taken in by sophisticated con artists who had researched his background and created a fake granddaughter to steal his life's work. She questioned the timing of my appearance, the convenience of my story, the suspicious lack of contact between Andrew and Emma after she left home. But Christopher Castillo was better. He had done his homework, tracking down medical records, school documents, and social workers who could verify my history. He had found the private investigator Andrew had hired to search for me, a man named Stephen White, who had worked the case for 3 years before Andrew's death. Stephen White was the key witness, a former police detective turned private investigator who had seen every kind of family drama and fraud case imaginable. He testified about the extensive search he had conducted, the dead ends and false leads, the moment when he finally found the right Nancy Watson in the right orphanage with the right birth records. Andrew Reed hired me because he never stopped believing his granddaughter was out there, Stephen said from the witness stand. He showed me pictures of Emma every time we met, told me stories about her childhood, described the fight that drove her away. When we finally found Nancy, the resemblance was unmistakable. But more than that, her story matched exactly what Andrew had pieced together about Emma's final months. This is not some elaborate con game. This is a grandfather who spent his last years trying to right a wrong, trying to give his granddaughter the home and family she should have had all along. The DNA evidence was conclusive, but it was the personal evidence that won the case. Christopher had found Emma's medical records from the hospital where I was born, records that listed Andrew Reed as next of kin, but had somehow never been properly processed by the state. He had found the letters Emma had written to a friend, letters that mentioned her pregnancy and her fear of going home to face her father's disappointment. Most damaging to Gary's case was his own behavior since Andrew's death. Witnesses testified about his drinking, his neglect of the property, his boasts about selling the land to developers once he got clear title. It became clear that Gary saw the ranch not as a legacy to preserve, but as an asset to liquidate. Judge Christine Flores ruled in my favor, but not before delivering a lecture that I will never forget. She talked about the nature of family, about the bonds that connect us across time and distance, about the responsibility that comes with inheriting not just property, but history. "Young lady," she said, looking directly at me, "you have been given something precious, not just land and buildings, but a second chance at the family connection that was stolen from you at birth. Your grandfather spent his final years trying to find you, not because he needed an heir, but because he needed to know that his daughter's child was safe and loved. Do not take that responsibility lightly." Gary Walker stormed out of the courthouse without a word, but I could see the defeat in his shoulders. Judith Alvarez shook Christopher's hand with professional courtesy, but she looked at me with something like respect. "You fought for this," she said. "Make sure you deserve it." The keys to the ranch felt heavy in my hand as Christopher and I drove back to Millbrook. I was now the owner of 60 acres, a house, a barn, 23 head of cattle, 4 horses, and more responsibility than I had ever imagined. I was also completely terrified. That first night alone in the house, I sat in Andrew's chair and read through his letters again. In one of them, written just months before his death, he had described his hopes for what I might do with the ranch. He did not expect me to become a rancher overnight, he wrote. He hoped I would find a way to honor the land while making it my own, to build on what he had started while creating something new. The next morning, I woke up to find half a dozen pickup trucks in my driveway. Word had gotten out about the court decision, and the neighbors had come to help. Some were there out of respect for Andrew, others out of curiosity about the orphan girl who had inherited the Reed place. But they all had the same message. Welcome to the neighborhood, and what do you need? Heather Gomez had brought breakfast for everyone. Stephen White, the private investigator who had found me, had driven down from Great Falls to meet me in person. Even some of Gary's former supporters had shown up, ready to give me a chance to prove myself. The foreman of the neighboring ranch, a weathered man in his 60s named Christopher Castillo's father, took me aside for a conversation that changed everything. Son, he said, Andrew was my friend for 40 years, and I made him a promise before he died. I promised I would look after his granddaughter if she ever showed up, teach her what she needed to know to make this place work. Learning to run a ranch at 18 with no experience was like trying to learn a foreign language while drowning. Every day brought new challenges that I had never imagined. Cattle that needed vaccinations, fences that needed repair, equipment that broke down at the worst possible moments. I made mistakes that cost money I could not afford to lose, and there were nights when I fell into bed so exhausted I could barely move. But the community that had initially been skeptical of me began to rally around my efforts. Heather Gomez taught me how to keep books and manage the business side of ranching. Stephen White's father, whose name was also Stephen, became my unofficial mentor, showing up every morning at dawn to teach me about animal husbandry, land management, and the thousand small skills that keep a ranch running. The horses were my biggest challenge and my greatest joy. I had never ridden before coming to Montana, and the 4 horses Andrew had left me seemed to sense my inexperience immediately. The oldest, a gentle mare named Emma after my mother, became my teacher. She was patient with my clumsy attempts to saddle her, tolerant of my nervous energy, and somehow always knew when I was about to make a mistake that could hurt us both. Riding Emma across the ranch on those early morning rounds, checking cattle and mending fences, I began to understand what Andrew had loved about this life. There was something profound about the rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of birth and growth and harvest that connected you to the land in ways I had never experienced in the city. But it was not just the work that was healing me. It was the sense of belonging, of having a place where my presence mattered, where my efforts had meaning beyond just survival. For the first time in my life, I was not just taking up space or waiting for someone to decide my fate. I was building something, contributing something, becoming someone. The first winter was brutal. Montana winters are legendary for good reason, and I was completely unprepared for the isolation and responsibility that came with caring for animals in sub-zero temperatures. There were nights when I had to check the cattle every few hours, making sure they had access to unfrozen water and adequate shelter. There were mornings when I had to break ice with an axe just to get to the barn, but the community that had embraced me did not abandon me when things got tough. Neighbors checked on me regularly, helped with the heaviest work, and taught me the winter routines that kept both animals and humans alive in the harsh climate. I learned to read weather patterns, to stock supplies before storms hit, to recognize the signs of frostbite and hypothermia in both livestock and myself. And spring brought new challenges and new rewards. Calving season meant sleepless nights and constant vigilance, but it also meant new life and the promise of income from cattle sales. I delivered my first calf with Stephen White Sr. guiding me through the process, and I cried with relief and joy when the little bull took his first breath and struggled to his feet. By my 19th birthday, I had survived my first full year as a rancher. The property was showing signs of my care and attention. The house had been thoroughly cleaned and redecorated with furniture I had bought secondhand and refinished myself. The barn had been repaired and reorganized. The fences were solid, the cattle were healthy, and I had even made a small profit from my first year's operations. But more important than the financial success was the personal transformation I had undergone. The frightened 18-year-old who had stepped off the bus in Millbrook was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more connected to the world around her. I had found not just a home, but an identity, not just property, but purpose. The second year brought new challenges as I began to expand operations and implement some of my own ideas. I started a small organic vegetable garden, selling produce at the local farmers market. I began offering riding lessons to local children, using Emma and the other horses to teach kids the skills I was still learning myself. I even started dating a young veterinarian named Anthony Jones, the nephew of my lawyer, who had moved to Millbrook to take over the practice from the retiring local vet. But perhaps the most meaningful development was my relationship with Gary Walker. He had never apologized for contesting the will, but he had stopped actively opposing my presence in the community. One day, about 18 months after I had inherited the ranch, he showed up at my door with a peace offering. He had brought a box of photographs and documents that had belonged to Andrew, things he had taken from the house before the court ordered him to leave. Among them were pictures of Emma I had never seen, letters from my grandmother to Andrew during their courtship, and a family Bible that traced the Reed family history back 4 generations. "I should have given you these sooner," he said, standing awkwardly on the porch where he had once challenged my right to be there. "Andrew would have wanted you to have them. Emma too, probably. I was angry when she left, angry when Andrew died, angry when you showed up. But anger does not bring anyone back or change what happened." We talked for hours that day, and I learned things about my family that the lawyers and documents had never revealed. Gary told me about Emma's childhood, about the fights between father and daughter that had driven her away, about Andrew's regrets and his desperate search for redemption through finding me. "Your grandfather was a good man," Gary said as he prepared to leave. "But he was human, and humans make mistakes. He made mistakes with Emma, and I made mistakes with you. Maybe it is not too late for both of us to do better." By the end of my second year on the ranch, I had established routines and relationships that made Millbrook feel like home in ways I had never experienced before. The morning coffee with Heather Gomez, who had become like a grandmother to me, the weekly dinners with Stephen White Sr. and his family, where I was treated like a daughter rather than a guest. The quiet evenings with Anthony Jones, planning a future that included both the ranch and the veterinary practice he was building. But it was a letter that arrived in late fall that reminded me how far I had come and how much I had gained. It was from Sarah Miller, my former social worker, who had been following my story through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls. She was writing to tell me about a young girl in the system, a 16-year-old named Christine Flores, who was aging out with no family and no prospects. Christine's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Parents dead, no known relatives, bounced between foster homes and group facilities for most of her life. She was smart, responsible, and completely alone, facing the same uncertain future I had confronted just 2 years earlier. Sarah was not asking me to adopt Christine or take legal responsibility for her own. She was asking if I might consider offering her what no one had ever offered me, a chance to belong somewhere, to learn skills that could give her independence, to experience the kind of community support that had transformed my own life. I drove to Great Falls the next weekend to meet Christine, and I saw myself in her guarded expression, her careful politeness, her refusal to hope for anything that might be taken away. She was smaller than I had been at 16, with dark hair and eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. But there was strength there too, the kind of resilience that comes from surviving things that would break other people. I did not make any promises that first day. Instead, I told her my story, about the grandfather I had never known who had left me a legacy, about the community that had embraced a stranger, about the land that had taught me who I could become. I invited her to visit the ranch, to see if she felt any connection to the life I was building there. Christine arrived for Thanksgiving weekend, carrying everything she owned in a single suitcase, just as I had done 2 years earlier. But unlike my first arrival in Millbrook, she was welcomed immediately and warmly. Heather Gomez fussed over her like a long-lost granddaughter. Stephen White Sr. taught her to ride Emma, the same gentle mare who had been my teacher. Anthony Jones showed her around the veterinary clinic, explaining the science behind animal care. Most importantly, I showed her the room I had prepared for her, the same room that had been intended for me when Andrew was still alive to welcome me home. I had painted it yellow, a color that felt hopeful and warm, and filled it with books and art supplies and everything a teenage girl might need to feel safe and valued. You do not have to decide anything right now, I told her as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. But if you want to stay, if you want to learn this life and help me build something here, you will always have a place. Not as a charity case or a project, but as family. As someone who belongs here because I choose you, the same way Andrew chose me. Christine cried then, the first tears I had seen from her since we met. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief, the tears of someone who had finally found what she had been looking for without even knowing she was searching. She enrolled in the local high school for her senior year, commuting from the ranch and helping with chores before and after classes. She had a natural affinity for the animals, especially the horses, and she threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch management and animal husbandry. More than that, she brought joy and energy to the house that had been too quiet for one person. Watching Christine blossom in the same environment that had transformed me, I began to understand something important about legacy and family. It was not just about blood relationships or inherited property. It was about creating connections, building community, and passing on opportunities for growth and belonging. The ranch that Andrew had left me was not just land and buildings. It was a foundation for something larger, a place where people who had been forgotten by the world could find their worth and their purpose. Christine was proof that the cycle could continue, that the love and support I had received could be shared with others who needed it just as desperately. Spring brought new plans and new possibilities. Christine and I worked together to expand the riding lesson program, bringing in children from the foster care system for weekend camps, where they could experience the healing power of animals in open spaces. We partnered with social services to provide internships for teenagers aging out of care, teaching them job skills and life skills in an environment where they were valued and supported. Anthony Jones proposed that summer, not with a dramatic gesture, but with a quiet conversation about building a life together that honored both our individual dreams and our shared commitment to the community we had found in Millbrook. We planned a wedding for the following spring, a celebration that would bring together all the people who had become family to me over the past 3 years. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Gary Walker asked if he could walk me down the aisle at my wedding. He had no obligation to do so, no family connection that required it. But he had become something like an uncle to me, a link to the grandfather I had never met and the mother I had never known. I would be honored, he said, if you would let me stand in for Andrew on your wedding day. He would have been so proud of what you have built here, of the woman you have become. Emma, too. I think she would have loved seeing her daughter find the home and family she never got to have. The wedding was everything I had never dared to dream of as a child in the orphanage. Not because it was elaborate or expensive, but because it was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about Anthony and me. People who had become family not through blood, but through choice and commitment. Christine served as my maid of honor, radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes and her smile. She had graduated valedictorian of her high school class and had been accepted to the state university with a full scholarship to study veterinary science. But she would be living at home, commuting from the ranch, continuing to help with our expanding programs for foster children and aging out teens. Heather Gomez had insisted on making the wedding cake, a 3-layer masterpiece decorated with sugar flowers that looked like they had been picked from the garden Andrew had planted decades earlier. Stephen White Sr. had organized the music, recruiting a local band that played everything from country classics to the folk songs I had learned to love during my years in Montana. The ceremony was held in the meadow behind the house, with the mountains as our backdrop and the entire community of Millbrook in attendance. Judge Christine Flores, who had ruled in my favor during the inheritance dispute, performed the ceremony with words that spoke not just about marriage, but about the nature of family and belonging. As I stood there holding Anthony's hands, surrounded by people who had chosen to love and support me, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From a frightened 18-year-old with nothing but a letter from a dead grandfather to a confident 21-year-old surrounded by family and community, building a life that honored the past while creating something entirely new. The reception was held in the barn, the same barn where my name had been painted above the door when I first arrived. We had decorated it with lights and flowers, transforming the working space into something magical. But it was still fundamentally a barn, still connected to the land and the animals and the work that had given my life meaning and purpose. Gary Walker's toast was the highlight of the evening, a speech that brought tears to eyes throughout the crowd. He talked about Andrew's love for the land, about Emma's spirit and independence, about the miracle of finding family in unexpected places and the responsibility that comes with being chosen. Nancy, he said, raising his glass toward me, you came here as a stranger and you have become the heart of this community. You have taken the legacy Andrew left you and made it into something he could never have imagined, something that gives hope and opportunity to young people who need it most. Emma would be proud of the daughter she never got to raise, and Andrew would be amazed at the granddaughter who exceeded his wildest dreams. The dancing went on until well past midnight, with couples of all ages swaying to music that echoed off the barn walls and drifted across the pastures where the cattle grazed peacefully under a sky full of stars. Christine danced with Stephen White Sr. Heather Gomez danced with Christopher Castillo, and I danced with my new husband while surrounded by the family we had chosen and the family that had chosen us. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the evening when the crowd had thinned and only the closest family remained. Anthony and I were sitting on the porch steps, still in our wedding clothes, watching the last guests help with cleanup and saying their goodbyes. Christine came and sat beside us, leaning against my shoulder with the comfortable affection of a sister. She had been quiet during the reception, and I could tell she was thinking about something important. Thank you, she said finally, her voice soft but clear in the mountain air. Not just for today, but for everything. For showing me that family is not something that happens to you, it is something you create. For teaching me that belonging is not about being chosen by someone else, it is about choosing to build something worth belonging to. I hugged her close, this girl who had become my sister, my partner in building the legacy Andrew had started, and I was determined to continue. Together, we were creating something that went beyond a ranch or a business or even a family. We were creating a place where young people who had been forgotten by the world could find their worth, their purpose, and their home. Anthony squeezed my hand, and I knew he understood the magnitude of what we were building together. His veterinary practice was thriving, serving not just the traditional ranching community, but also the therapeutic riding programs and foster care initiatives we had developed. He had become as committed as I was to using our resources and our platform to make a difference in the lives of young people who needed advocates and opportunities. As the last guest departed and we finally went inside the house that had become our home, I paused in the hallway to look at the photographs that covered the walls. Pictures of Emma, my mother at various ages, pictures of Andrew working the land he loved, pictures of the ranch through the seasons and years, and now new pictures of Christine and Anthony and me, of the wedding celebration, of the foster children who came for riding lessons, of the community that had embraced us all. The legacy was continuing, evolving, growing into something larger than any one person could have imagined. Andrew had left me a ranch, but I had built it into something that could change lives, something that could give hope and opportunity to young people who desperately needed both. 5 years have passed since that November day when I first learned about my inheritance, and the transformation has been beyond anything I could have imagined. The ranch now operates as both a working cattle operation and a therapeutic center for foster children and aging out teens. We have expanded to 80 acres through the purchase of adjacent land, built additional housing for program participants, and established partnerships with social services agencies across 3 states. Christine graduated from veterinary school last spring and has joined Anthony's practice as a full partner. She specializes in equine therapy, working with both the horses and the young people who come to the ranch seeking healing and direction. Her own experience in the foster care system gives her a unique ability to connect with participants who might otherwise resist help or intervention. The success stories are what keep us motivated through the challenges and setbacks that come with any ambitious undertaking. Marcus, a 17-year-old who came to us angry and defensive after aging out of his 4th foster home, now manages our social media presence and is studying agricultural business at the State University. Sarah, a 16-year-old who had never been on a horse before arriving at the ranch, competed in her first rodeo last summer and earned a scholarship to study equine science. But it is not just the dramatic transformations that matter. It is also the quiet victories, the small moments of connection and growth that happen every day. A shy child learning to trust through caring for a gentle horse. A teenager discovering leadership skills by mentoring younger participants. A young adult realizing that their traumatic past does not have to define their future possibilities. The financial sustainability of our programs has been a constant challenge, but the community support has been extraordinary. Local businesses sponsor participants, provide internships, and donate equipment and supplies. The state has recognized our work with grants and contracts that help fund operations. National foundations focused on foster care reform have provided funding for expansion and program development. Most importantly, we have created a model that other communities are beginning to replicate. Delegations visit regularly to study our approach and adapt it to their own circumstances. We have consulted on similar programs in 4 states, helping other communities develop therapeutic ranching initiatives that serve vulnerable young people. The house that once felt too big for one person now bustles with activity and life. Christine and her boyfriend, a teacher from the local high school, live in the apartment we built above the barn. Anthony and I occupy the main house, which serves as both our home and the administrative center for the programs. We have guest rooms for visiting participants, program alumni who return for holidays and special events, and the occasional researcher or journalist documenting our work. But we have also preserved the quiet spaces, the places where Andrew's presence can still be felt and honored. His bedroom remains largely unchanged, with his books and photographs and the letters he wrote to a granddaughter he hoped to find someday. The porch where he used to sit in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains, is still our favorite place for important conversations and quiet reflection. The barn still bears my name above the door, but we have added others over the years. Christine's place, Marcus's workshop, Sarah's arena. Each name represents a young person who found belonging here, who contributed to building something larger than themselves, who proved that family and home can be created through choice and commitment rather than accident of birth. Anthony and I have talked about having children of our own, and we probably will someday. But we already have a family that spans age and backgrounds and experiences, bound together not by genetics, but by shared values and mutual support. The young people who come to us as strangers often stay connected long after they have moved on to independent lives, returning for holidays and celebrations, bringing their own families to meet the people who helped shape their futures. Gary Walker passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. His funeral was held in the same church where Andrew had been memorialized, and the crowd that gathered to honor him included dozens of young people whose lives had been touched by the programs he had come to support enthusiastically. In his will, he left his own property to our foundation, ensuring that the work Andrew had started through me would continue for generations to come. The legal documents establishing the Reed Foundation for Foster Care Innovation were signed last month, creating a permanent structure to sustain and expand our work beyond the lifetimes of any individual participants or leaders. The foundation will ensure that the ranch continues to serve vulnerable young people, that the programs we have developed continue to evolve and improve, and that Andrew's legacy of love and second chances continues to transform lives. Standing in the meadow where Anthony and I were married, watching Christine lead a group of new arrivals on their first trail ride, I am overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that brought me here. The frightened 18-year-old who stepped off the bus in Millbrook with nothing but a letter from a dead grandfather could never have imagined the life I have built, the family I have found, the impact we have been able to make together. But more than that, I am filled with hope for the future we are creating. Every young person who finds healing and direction here carries our values and our approach into the world, creating ripple effects of positive change that extend far beyond our valley in Montana. Every success story inspires others to believe in the possibility of transformation, to invest in young people who have been written off by society, to create communities where belonging is based on contribution rather than circumstance. The morning routine at the ranch begins before dawn, just as it did in Andrew and I's time, but now it involves coordinating the activities of 30 residents, staff members, and volunteers rather than one lonely man working the land by himself. I still make the first round of the day, checking on the animals and assessing the needs for the hours ahead. But now I am often accompanied by Christine or one of the senior participants, who have earned the responsibility of helping manage daily operations. The horses remain the heart of our therapeutic programs, and we now maintain a herd of 12 animals specifically selected and trained for their temperament and suitability for working with traumatized young people. Emma, my first teacher and companion, is now 23 years old and serves as the grandmother of our herd, gentle and patient with the most frightened newcomers, somehow knowing exactly how much pressure to apply and when to back off. The cattle operation has expanded to support both our financial sustainability and our educational programs. Participants learn every aspect of ranching, from breeding and birthing to marketing and financial management. Many discover talents and interests they never knew they possessed, leading to career paths in agriculture, veterinary medicine, business management, and related fields. But the real magic happens in the quiet moments between the structured activities and formal programs. It happens when a 16-year-old who has never trusted an adult finds herself confiding in Christine during evening chores. It happens when a tough kid from the city discovers that he has a gift for calming frightened animals. It happens when a girl who has aged out of foster care realizes that she has found not just a job, but a calling, not just a temporary placement, but a permanent home. The success of our programs has brought attention from researchers, policymakers, and media outlets interested in innovative approaches to foster care reform. We have been featured in documentaries, academic studies, and policy reports that highlight the effectiveness of our model. But we have been careful to manage this attention in ways that protect the privacy and dignity of our participants while sharing the lessons we have learned. One of the most important lessons is that healing happens in relationship, not in isolation. The young people who come to us have often experienced profound betrayal and abandonment by the adults who were supposed to protect them. They need to experience consistent, caring relationships with adults who follow through on their commitments and who see potential rather than just problems. Another crucial lesson is that meaningful work provides both purpose and dignity. The participants in our programs are not clients or patients receiving services. They are contributing members of a working community responsible for tasks that matter to the success of the operation. They care for animals that depend on them, maintain facilities that house other young people, and contribute to programs that serve the broader community. The financial model we have developed combines revenue from the working ranch with grants, donations, and contracts for services provided to social services agencies. This diversified approach provides sustainability while ensuring that we never have to choose between financial viability and serving young people who need our programs most. We have proven that therapeutic ranching can be both effective and economically sustainable when properly structured and managed. The academic partnerships we have established provide ongoing evaluation of our outcomes and continuous improvement of our methods. University researchers study our approach, participants in our programs, and the long-term impacts of therapeutic ranching on young people who have experienced trauma and abandonment. The data consistently shows significant improvements in mental health, educational achievement, employment outcomes, and social functioning among program participants. But beyond the statistics and research findings, there are the stories that remind us why this work matters so profoundly. Like David, who came to us at 17 after aging out of foster care with no family connections and no job skills, who now manages a successful horse training business and serves on our board of directors. Like Maria, who arrived pregnant and terrified at 16, who now has a degree in social work and runs our family and support programs. These success stories are not anomalies or exceptions. They are the natural result of providing young people with what they need most: unconditional acceptance, meaningful responsibility, and the opportunity to contribute to something larger than themselves. When we create communities where belonging is based on contribution rather than circumstance, where healing happens through relationship rather than isolation, young people who have been written off by society discover their own capacity for transformation and leadership. The expansion of our programs to include family reunification services has been one of our most challenging and rewarding developments. We now work with biological families when possible, providing support and resources to help parents develop the skills and stability needed to safely reunite with their children. The ranch setting provides a neutral, supportive environment where families can work on rebuilding relationships while learning practical skills that support long-term success. Anthony's veterinary practice has become an integral part of our therapeutic approach, with animal-assisted therapy programs that serve not just our residents, but also families and individuals from the broader community. The healing power of human-animal relationships is well documented, but experiencing it daily in our programs has given a deep appreciation for the profound connections that can develop between vulnerable young people and animals that offer unconditional acceptance. The leadership development component of our programs has produced a new generation of advocates and change agents who carry our values and approaches into their own communities and careers. Former participants serve on boards of directors, work for social services agencies, start their own nonprofits, and advocate for policy changes that better serve vulnerable children and families. The 10th anniversary celebration of my arrival in Millbrook was held last month, and the gathering included more than 200 people whose lives have been touched by the programs we have built together. Former participants came with their spouses and children, staff members past and present shared stories and memories. Community supporters celebrated a decade of partnership and growth. But for me, the most meaningful moment came when Christine stood up to speak about her own journey from frightened 16-year-old foster child to confident veterinarian and program leader. She talked about the importance of having adults who believe in your potential even when you cannot see it yourself, about the healing power of meaningful work and genuine community, about the responsibility that comes with being given opportunities that others never receive. Nancy taught me that family is not something that happens to you, she said, looking directly at me with tears in her eyes. It is something you build, something you choose, something you create through love and commitment and shared purpose. She showed me that my past does not have to define my future, that my experiences can be sources of strength rather than just sources of pain. The financial sustainability of our programs has exceeded all projections, with the ranch operation generating enough revenue to support basic operations while grants and donations fund program expansion and innovation. We have established an endowment that will ensure the permanent continuation of our work, and we have developed a replication model that other communities can adapt to their own circumstances and resources. The policy impact of our work has been equally significant. Our research partnerships have produced evidence that has influenced foster care reform initiatives at state and federal levels. Our advocacy efforts have helped secure increased funding for therapeutic programs, improved training for social workers and foster parents, and policy changes that prioritize family preservation and community-based services. But the most important impact remains the individual transformations that happen here every day. Young people who arrive broken and hopeless discover their own strength and potential. They learn that they are capable of love and worthy of love, that they have contributions to make and gifts to share, that their futures are not limited by their pasts. The ranch itself has evolved into something Andrew could never have imagined when he left it to a granddaughter he had never met. The original house has been expanded and renovated to serve as both family home and program headquarters. The barn complex now includes specialized facilities for equine therapy, vocational training, and community events. The pastures support not just cattle and horses, but also organic gardens, renewable energy systems, and outdoor education programs. The community of Millbrook has been transformed as well. The population has grown to nearly 1,500 residents, many of them drawn by the opportunity to be part of something meaningful and innovative. Property values have increased, local businesses have expanded, and the town has gained national recognition as a model for rural community development and social innovation. The relationships that have sustained and strengthened our work extend far beyond the ranch boundaries. We maintain connections with hundreds of former participants, their families, and the professionals who have worked with us over the years. These networks provide ongoing support, mentorship opportunities, and advocacy for continued innovation and improvement in services for vulnerable young people. Anthony and I finally had our first biological child 2 years ago, a daughter we named Emma Grace in honor of my mother and the grace that brought us all together. Watching her grow up surrounded by the extended family we have created, seeing her interact with the young people who come to us seeking healing and direction, I am filled with hope for the future we are building together. Emma Grace will grow up knowing that family is not limited by blood relationships, that home is created through love and commitment rather than accident of birth, that everyone has the capacity for transformation and contribution when given the right opportunities and support. She will inherit not just property and financial resources, but also values and relationships that will guide her throughout her life. The letters Andrew wrote to me before we ever met have become treasured family documents, read and reread by each new generation of young people who find their way to the ranch. His words about legacy and family, about the importance of creating connections across time and distance, continue to inspire and guide our work decades after his death. In one of those letters, he wrote about his hope that I would find a way to honor the land while making it my own, to build on what he had started while creating something entirely new. I think he would be amazed and proud of what has grown from the seed he planted, of the forest of relationships and opportunities that has sprouted from his simple act of love and faith. The ranch that began as one man's legacy to a granddaughter he never met has become a community resource that serves hundreds of young people and families each year. It has become a model for innovation in foster care, a center for research and policy development, a training ground for the next generation of leaders in child welfare and community development. But most importantly, it has become a place where young people who have been forgotten by the world can find their worth, their purpose, and their home. It has become a place where the cycle of abandonment and trauma can be broken, where healing and hope can take root, where the future can be shaped by love rather than limited by loss. As I write this story, I am sitting on the same porch where Andrew used to watch the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, where I first read his letter welcoming me home to a place I had never seen. The view has not changed much in the 12 years since I first arrived in Millbros, but everything else has been transformed beyond recognition. The ranch now employs 43 full-time staff members and serves more than 300 young people annually through residential programs, day services, family support initiatives, and community outreach efforts. We have become the largest employer in the county and a significant contributor to the regional economy, proving that social innovation can drive economic development in rural communities. The educational partnerships we have developed include collaborations with universities, community colleges, and K-12 schools that provide academic credit, vocational training, and career pathway development for program participants. We have established scholarship programs that ensure every young person who completes our residential program has access to post-secondary education or advanced vocational training. The research conducted at the ranch has contributed to a growing body of evidence about effective interventions for young people who have experienced trauma and abandonment. Our publications appear regularly in academic journals, our staff present at national conferences, and our model has been replicated in 17 states and 3 countries. But for all the growth and recognition and impact, the heart of our work remains the same as it was when Christine first arrived as a frightened 16-year-old with everything she owned in a single suitcase. We create family for young people who have never experienced unconditional love. We provide meaningful work for young people who have never been trusted with real responsibility, and we build community for young people who have never belonged anywhere. The success stories continue to multiply and inspire. Former participants now serve as teachers, social workers, veterinarians, business owners, and community leaders. They have started their own families, bought their own homes, and created their own versions of the healing community they experienced at the ranch. They return regularly for holidays and celebrations, bringing their children to meet the people who help shape their futures. The challenges continue as well. Funding is always a struggle, despite our diversified revenue streams and strong community support. The needs of the young people we serve continue to evolve as social conditions change and new forms of trauma emerge. The political and policy environment for foster care and social services remains unstable and unpredictable. But we have learned to navigate these challenges with the same resilience and determination that brought us through the early years when everything was uncertain and nothing was guaranteed. We have built systems and structures that can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the core values and relationships that make our work effective. The legacy that Andrew began when he decided to search for a granddaughter he had never met continues to grow and evolve in ways none of us could have predicted. What started as one man's attempt to right a wrong and heal a family wound has become a movement that touches thousands of lives and influences policy and practice across the country. Christine now serves as executive director of the Reed Foundation, bringing her unique combination of lived experience, professional expertise, and passionate commitment to the leadership role she was born to fill. Anthony continues to provide veterinary services while also serving as medical director for our animal-assisted therapy programs. Together, we have created a leadership structure that ensures the continuity and growth of our work regardless of individual circumstances or changes. The most recent addition to our family is a 3-year-old boy named Marcus, whom Anthony and I adopted after his teenage mother completed our family support program and decided she was not ready for the responsibilities of parenthood. Marcus will grow up as Emma Grace's brother, surrounded by the same extended family and community support that has nurtured hundreds of young people over the past decade. Watching Marcus and Emma Grace play together in the yard where I once felt so alone and uncertain, I am struck by the profound transformation that has taken place not just in my own life, but in the lives of everyone who has been part of this journey. We have created something that will outlast all of us, something that will continue to provide healing and hope for generations to come. The letters I write now are not to a grandfather I never met, but to the young people who will come to the ranch in years to come, long after I am gone. I write to tell them that they are not alone, that they are worthy of love and capable of transformation, that their past does not have to limit their future possibilities. I write to tell them that family is not something that happens to you, but something you create through choice and commitment and love. I write to tell them that home is not a place you come from, but a place you build with the people who choose to stand beside you through all of life's challenges and celebrations. Most of all, I write to tell them that they matter, that their lives have value and purpose, that the world is better because they are in it. These are the words I needed to hear when I was 18 and alone and terrified. And they are the words that every young person deserves to hear, regardless of their circumstances or history. The ranch that Andrew left me has become so much more than property or inheritance or even legacy. It has become a living testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the importance of community in healing trauma, to the possibility of creating family and home through choice rather than chance. Today marks exactly 15 years since I first read Andrew's letter in that lawyer's office. 15 years since I learned that I had a grandfather who had been searching for me. 15 years since I began the journey that led me to this moment, this place, this life I could never have imagined. The ranch now spans more than 200 acres and serves as the flagship site for a network of therapeutic ranching programs across the western United States. The Reed Foundation has become a nationally recognized leader in foster care innovation, with an annual budget of more than $5 million and partnerships with agencies and organizations in 37 states. But the numbers, impressive as they are, tell only part of the story. The real story is written in the lives of the young people who have found healing and hope here, in the families that have been reunified and strengthened, in the communities that have been transformed by the presence of young people who were once considered throwaway kids. Emma Grace is now 13 years old and serves as an unofficial ambassador for the ranch, showing visitors around and explaining our programs with the confidence and knowledge of someone who has grown up surrounded by this work. Marcus is 10 and has already decided he wants to be a veterinarian like his dad, spending every free moment in the clinic learning about animal care and healing. Christine and her husband David now have 3 children of their own, and their family lives in the house we built on the hill overlooking the original ranch. She continues to serve as executive director of the foundation while also maintaining her veterinary practice and serving on state and national committees focused on foster care reform and therapeutic intervention. The community of Millbrook has grown to nearly 3,000 residents, many of them drawn by the opportunity to be part of something meaningful and transformative. The town has been featured in national magazines as a model for rural community development. But the residents who have been here since the beginning know that the real transformation began when a frightened 18-year-old girl stepped off a bus with nothing but a letter from a dead grandfather. Anthony and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary last month with a renewal of vows ceremony held in the same meadow where we first married. The crowd that gathered to celebrate with us included hundreds of young people whose lives have been touched by our work, staff members and volunteers who have dedicated their careers to this mission, and community members who have supported us through every challenge and triumph. But the most meaningful moment of the celebration came when Gary Walker's grandson, now a successful rancher himself, presented us with a gift that brought tears to everyone's eyes. It was the original deed to Andrew's ranch, framed alongside a photo of Andrew and Emma, my mother, taken just weeks before she ran away from home for the last time. "This is where it all started," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "With a man who loved his daughter too much to let go and not enough to let her grow. With a woman who was too proud to ask for forgiveness and too young to understand grace. With a granddaughter who inherited not just land but the opportunity to heal wounds that had festered for generations." The speech he gave that day captured something essential about the journey we have all taken together, about the way individual healing can become community transformation, about the way love and commitment can create family and home where none existed before. The letters I have written to future generations of young people who will come to the ranch are now collected in a book that serves as both memoir and manual for therapeutic ranching programs around the world. The book tells the story of our journey while providing practical guidance for communities that want to develop their own versions of healing and hope for vulnerable young people. But the most important message in those letters is the same message Andrew tried to convey to me in his final letter. The message that every young person needs to hear, regardless of their circumstances or history. You are not alone. You are worthy of love. You have contributions to make and gifts to share. Your past does not have to limit your future possibilities. The ranch that began as one man's attempt to find his lost granddaughter has become a beacon of hope for thousands of young people who have lost their way. It has become a place where the cycle of abandonment and trauma can be broken, where healing and transformation are not just possible but expected, where family and home are created through choice and commitment rather than accident of birth. As I finish writing this story, I can hear the sounds of evening chores beginning in the barn, the voices of young people caring for animals that depend on them, the laughter of children who have found safety and belonging in this place that has become their home. These are the sounds that fill the silence that once surrounded Andrew in his final years, the sounds of life and hope and community that he dreamed of but never got to experience. The sunset is painting the mountains purple and gold, just as it did on that first evening when I sat on this porch reading his letter and trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in the space of a single day. The view is the same, but everything else has been transformed by the power of love to create family, community, and hope where none existed before. If you have been moved by this story, if you have your own experiences with foster care or adoption or finding family in unexpected places, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your stories of transformation and healing, of communities that have embraced you, of people who have chosen to love you when love seemed impossible. Subscribe to hear more stories of young people who have overcome impossible odds, of communities that have created hope where none existed, of the power of love and commitment to transform lives and heal wounds that seemed too deep to mend. Share the story with others who need to know that they are not alone, that they are worthy of love, that their futures are not limited by their pasts. Most of all, remember that family is not something that happens to you, but something you create through choice and commitment and love. Home is not a place you come from, but a place you build with people who choose to stand beside you through all of life's challenges and celebrations. And belonging is not about being perfect or having the right background or meeting someone else's expectations. Belonging is about showing up, contributing what you can, and choosing to love and be loved in return. The ranch that Andrew left me has taught me that we are never really alone, that there is always hope for healing and transformation, that love has the power to create family and home and community where none existed before. This is the legacy I want to leave for future generations, the message I want to share with anyone who has ever felt forgotten or abandoned or alone. You matter. Your life has value and purpose. The world is better because you are in it, and somewhere someone is looking for you, hoping to find you, ready to love you exactly as you are.